This is a dramatization. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I sat in the plush leather chair of my late father's attorney, feeling like a ghost at a feast. The room smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the cloying scent of my stepmother's perfume. Lydia Vance, a woman whose smile had always been a carefully sharpened weapon, sat opposite me, dabbing a dry eye with a silk handkerchief. Her performance was flawless. Beside her, my stepsister, Charlotte, mirrored the expression, a perfect understudy in curated grief. "It's just so final," Lydia whispered, her voice catching with practiced sorrow. She glanced at me, her gaze holding not sympathy, but a cold, triumphant glint. "Of course, Eleanor, you understand. You were never one for sentiment." I didn't respond. For the past 15 years, since she had married my father, my role in this family had been meticulously rewritten by Lydia. I was the difficult one, the cold one, the daughter who was detached and ungrateful. It was a narrative she had crafted with such painstaking detail that even my father, in his fog of illness and medication, had started to believe it. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose stooped shoulders seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 family secrets, cleared his throat. He was my father's lawyer for 40 years, a relic from a time before Lydia. "We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Arthur Vance," he began, his voice dry as parchment. He adjusted his spectacles and looked at Lydia. "As the executor, Mrs. Vance, you provided this document signed and witnessed on June 10th of this year." Lydia gave a solemn nod. "Arthur wanted to make sure everything was simplified, for everyone's peace of mind." Her eyes flickered to me again. The message was clear: my peace of mind. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my posture straight. I looked at the mahogany desk, at the framed photo of my father and me when I was 10, taken at the entrance to the National Archives. He was beaming, holding a dusty tome, and I was looking up at him as if he held the entire world. Lydia had tried to have that photo removed from the office waiting room years ago, claiming it was outdated. Mr. Abernathy had quietly refused. He began to read. The language was dense, legalistic, but the intent was brutally simple. The house, the portfolio of stocks, the art collection, the savings, it all went to his beloved wife, Lydia Vance. A generous trust was established for his cherished daughter, Charlotte. Then he came to my part. Mr. Abernathy paused, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. He took a sip of water. "And to my first daughter, Eleanor Vance," he read, the words not sounding like my father's at all. "In recognition of her independent spirit and self-sufficiency, I bequeath the sum of $20,000, with the hope that she will find her own way, as she has always preferred to do." A gasp came from Charlotte, a perfectly timed beat of feigned shock. Lydia reached over and patted her hand. "It's what your father wanted, darling. He knew Eleanor wouldn't want to be burdened." The insult was perfectly crafted. It wasn't just the pittance, a rounding error in my father's estate. It was the narrative, the independent, cold daughter who wanted nothing to do with her family. A lie Lydia had been seeding for over a decade, now codified in a legal document, my father's supposed final words. Lydia leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, meant only for me, but loud enough for the room to absorb. "He loved you in his own way. But let's be honest, Eleanor. You were never really part of this family, not the one we built." I met her gaze. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in a long time, the familiar sting of her cruelty didn't land, because I knew something she didn't. I knew my father, and I knew that the woman sitting across from me, radiating smug victory, had made a fatal error. She had underestimated the quiet, difficult archivist daughter. She had no idea that for the last 6 months, I hadn't been grieving. I had been working, My father, Arthur Vance, was a historian, not the kind who appeared on television documentaries, but the quiet, serious kind who believed that truth was a tangible thing, something that could be excavated from layers of lies and neglect. He taught me how to read the past, not just in books, but in the watermark of a letter, the acidity of old ink, the provenance of a document. "History's justice is slow, Ellie," he used to tell me, his study smelling of pipe tobacco and decaying paper. "But it is meticulous." My mother died when I was 16. She was the warmth in our house of quiet academics. Her absence left a silence that my father and I filled with work. I followed in his footsteps, not as a historian, but as a guardian of history. I became an archivist, a keeper of records, a person who understood that the story of anything, a person, a family, a nation, was written in the paper trail it left behind. Then came Lydia. She arrived 2 years later, a whirlwind of bright colors and loud laughter that seemed to fill all the empty spaces in our quiet home. At first I was relieved. She made my father smile again. She redecorated the house, replacing the muted tones with vibrant, modern art. She hosted dinner parties where my father, who usually preferred solitude, would hold court, animated and happy. The erosion was subtle at first. Lydia would helpfully manage my father's schedule. "Oh, Eleanor, your father is just exhausted today. Let's reschedule your visit." She started handling the finances. "Arthur shouldn't have to worry about these tedious bills. I can take care of it." She spoke of me to their new, glittering circle of friends with a tone of fond exasperation. "Eleanor is so brilliant, but she's in her own little world. All those dusty books. I can barely get her to come to a party." I was in my late 20s, building my career, living in my own apartment an hour away. The distance made her campaign of isolation easier. Phone calls with my father became shorter, more stilted. Lydia was always on the extension, interjecting, answering for him. When I tried to talk to him about it, he seemed confused. "Lydia is just trying to help, dear. She has so much energy." The breaking point came when he got sick. It started as a persistent cough, then became a diagnosis that stole the air from the room: advanced lung cancer. The vibrant, laughing man who had married Lydia was suddenly frail, his mind clouded by pain and the heavy narcotics meant to manage it. Lydia became his gatekeeper. "The doctors said he needs absolute rest," she'd say, blocking the doorway to his bedroom. "He's not up for visitors." "I'm not a visitor, Lydia. I'm his daughter." "And you're upsetting him," she'd reply, her voice hardening. "All this talk about the past, about old papers. It's confusing for him. He needs to be in the now." She controlled the flow of information, the nurses, the medication schedule. She told me he was declining, that he was often incoherent. She told our family friends that he was too weak to speak on the phone. When I did manage to see him, he was often asleep, or so heavily medicated he could barely form a sentence. In his few lucid moments, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes, a desperation I couldn't quite decipher before the fog rolled back in. The final time I saw him alive, I'd driven down after a nurse, a temporary one Lydia hadn't vetted personally, called me, her voice hushed. "His breathing is shallow. I think you should come." When I arrived, Lydia met me in the foyer, her face a mask of fury. "What are you doing here? I told you he's resting." The nurse called me. "That nurse will be fired," she hissed. "You are not to go in there. You will not disturb his final moments with your negativity." We stood there 2 feet apart, and in that moment I saw the entirety of her plan. She wasn't protecting him. She was possessing him. She was curating his death just as she had curated his life, ensuring her version of the story was the only one that would survive. I left without seeing him. He passed away 2 days later. The official story, the one Lydia told everyone, was that I hadn't bothered to come say goodbye. Hit subscribe if you believe that silence can be a weapon. Comment your city and share this with someone who's been underestimated. In the numb week after the funeral, I stayed in my small apartment, surrounded by the scent of my own books and papers. The grief was a physical weight, but underneath it, a cold, clear thought began to form. Lydia thought she had won. She thought she had erased me. But my father had taught me better. He had taught me that nothing is ever truly erased. It just has to be found. My father was a creature of habit and redundancy. He kept copies of everything. He had a fireproof safe in his study, a safe deposit box at his bank, and a digital archive on a password-protected server he'd built himself. Lydia knew about the safe in the study. She'd had a locksmith open it the day after he died. She likely knew about the bank box, but she didn't know about the server. She didn't even know what a server was. To her, it was just another humming, dusty box in the basement. The first clue my father left me was in a book. A week after the funeral, a package arrived. It was from a rare book dealer my father had used for years. Inside was a first edition of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, a book we had often discussed. There was no note from the dealer, just a receipt showing my father had purchased it and arranged for it to be mailed to me upon his death. I knew it was a message. I spent an entire night with the book, my archivist's gloves on, carefully examining every page. I wasn't looking for a hidden letter. My father was more subtle than that. I was looking for a pattern. On page 86, in a passage about speaking truth, I found it. A tiny, almost invisible pinprick above the third word of the third line, and another on page 112, and another on page 204. It was a cipher, a simple book cipher we had played with as a child. Page number, line number, word number. It took me 2 hours to decode it. The message was 7 words long. Abernathy knows. Check the server. Veritas vos liberabit. The truth will set you free. Abernathy, the old lawyer. Not the slick corporate attorney Lydia had hired for her own affairs, but my father's loyal, quiet counsel. And the server. The humming box in the basement. Getting to it was the first challenge. I called Lydia, my voice meek and sorrowful. I told her I needed to pick up a few of my childhood things from the attic, things my father had saved for me. "Must you do it now, Eleanor?" she sighed, the weary matriarch. "It's such a difficult time." "It's just, I need something of his. A box of my old report cards. It won't take long." She relented, likely imagining me weeping over old drawings, a pathetic, broken figure. She told me she and Charlotte would be out for a spa day. Grief counseling, she called it, and that the housekeeper could let me in. The moment I was inside the house, I didn't go to the attic. I went straight to the basement. The server was there, tucked behind a rack of Lydia's expensive, barely touched wine. It was still running. My father, the meticulous historian, had set it up with a backup power supply. He knew it had to outlast him. I plugged in a keyboard and monitor I'd brought with me. The login screen appeared. It asked for a password. I tried his birthday, my mother's birthday, my birthday. Nothing. Then I thought about the man he was, the historian, the archivist. What was the most important date to a man who valued provenance above all? I typed it in, 04151492. The date the first printing press was established in Spain. Access granted. The screen lit up with a file system that was as organized and logical as my father's mind. There were folders for his research, his manuscripts, his correspondence. And there was one folder created just 8 months ago labeled simply Contingency. I clicked it. My breath caught in my throat. It was all there. My father, knowing his mind was fading but still fighting, had spent his last lucid months building a case against his own wife. He had been an archivist of his own life. There were scanned financial statements, annotated in his spidery handwriting. He had tracked Lydia's spending, highlighting extravagant purchases made from his accounts. He had documented how she had systematically moved his assets into joint accounts, then into accounts under her sole ownership. There was a copy of her credit report from just before their marriage, showing she'd been on the verge of bankruptcy. He had even recorded some of their conversations. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Now back to the story. I listened to one, my hand over my mouth. It was my father's voice, weak but clear, asking Lydia about a large withdrawal. "It's for the decorators, darling," her voice cooed. "We must keep the house looking perfect. You know how important appearances are." The file was cross-referenced with a bank statement showing the money had been transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands in Charlotte's name. He had documented the isolation, too. He'd kept a log of my calls with notes. Eleanor called at 2:15 p.m. Lydia told her I was sleeping. I was not. He had saved emails I had sent, which Lydia had apparently deleted from his inbox before he could see them. He'd even written a detailed, heart-wrenching journal entry about the day she had turned me away from the house. "She is trying to sever my last connection to my own history," he wrote. "She wants me to be an island with her as the sole inhabitant." The final folder was labeled "The Last Word." Inside was a video file. I clicked play. My father appeared on the screen. He was in his study, looking thin and pale, but his eyes were sharp. The eyes I remembered from my childhood, the eyes of a man who had found the truth. "Hello, Ellie," he said, his voice raspy. "If you are watching this, it means I have failed to outlive her schemes, but I have succeeded in getting this to you. I am of sound mind and body as much as can be expected. It is October 17th. Dr. Matthews has just left and can attest to my lucidity." He took a breath. "The woman I married is not the woman I thought she was. She is a predator who preys on loneliness. She has isolated me, drugged me, and stolen from me. She is waiting for me to die. She will likely produce a will that disinherits you and paints you as a stranger. It is a lie. Every word of it is a lie." He held up a thick document bound in blue. "This is my real will. My true and final testament. I have signed it today with my nurse and Dr. Matthews as witnesses. Mr. Abernathy has the original. He has his instructions. He is to wait for you. He is to wait for your signal." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. He wasn't stolen from me. He had been fighting for me, for us, until the very end. "She underestimated you, Ellie," my father continued, a faint smile on his lips. "She thinks your love for old things, for paper and ink, is a weakness. She doesn't understand. It is your strength. You know how to find things. You know how to verify the truth. I have left you the evidence. The rest is in your hands. Do not let her erase us. Veritas vos liberabit." The screen went dark. I sat there in the cold basement for a long time, the hum of the server a comforting presence. He had left me a map, a weapon. He had left me justice, wrapped in a final act of love. I copied the entire server onto a series of encrypted hard drives. Then I walked upstairs, grabbed a box of my old childhood drawings from the attic for show, and left the house that was no longer my home. The next day, I called Mr. Abernathy. "I'd like to schedule a meeting," I said. "It's about my father's estate." When we met in his office, the same one where the will would later be read, I didn't show him my evidence right away. I am my father's daughter, after all. I understand the importance of provenance. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, "I have reason to believe the will Lydia Vance will present is not my father's final testament." He looked at me over his spectacles, his expression unreadable. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that my father contacted me after his death," I said, and laid the copy of Meditations on his desk. I explained the cipher. A slow smile spread across his ancient face. "Arthur always did love his games," he murmured. He leaned back in his chair. "He told me you would come. He told me you would figure it out." He then explained his side. My father had come to him 8 months ago, looking frail but resolute. He had laid out his suspicions about Lydia. Together, they had started the process of secretly documenting her fraud and drafting a new will. The will Lydia would present, my father had predicted, would be one she would force him to sign on a day when he was heavily medicated and disoriented. He had even told Mr. Abernathy the likely contents. His instructions to me were very specific, Abernathy said. I was to accept the fraudulent will from Mrs. Vance. I was to schedule the reading. I was to let her believe she had succeeded. And I was to wait for your signal. Your arrival here today is that signal. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a blue-bound document. It was the will from my father's video. This, he said, tapping it, is the real last will and testament of Arthur Vance. It names you, Eleanor, as the sole executor of his estate. It also contains several provisions that Mrs. Vance will find most disagreeable. For the next few weeks, I lived a double life. To Lydia and the world, I was the grieving, disinherited daughter. I answered her calls with a listless voice. I allowed her to offer me patronizing advice about finding a therapist. I played the part of the defeated so perfectly that she grew bolder, more confident in her victory. She started renovations on the house, sold my father's beloved classic car, and hosted a somber but lavish celebration of life party, where she held court as the tragic, devoted widow. I did not attend. Meanwhile, I worked with Mr. Abernathy preparing. We verified every piece of evidence my father had collected. We subpoenaed bank records that corroborated the secret offshore accounts. We got a sworn affidavit from Dr. Matthews regarding my father's state of mind on the day he signed the true will. We even tracked down the temporary nurse who had called me, and she provided a statement about Lydia's habit of over-medicating her husband on days when legal documents needed signing. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for the performance. If Sweet Retribution has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below. And hit that hype button if you haven't already. Now back to the story. And now, here we were. In the lawyer's office, the air thick with Lydia's triumph. She had just delivered her final cruel verdict on my place in the family. You were never really part of this family. I looked up from my folded hands and met Mr. Abernathy's gaze. I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He cleared his throat, a sound that cut through Lydia's smug satisfaction. That concludes the reading of the document provided by Mrs. Vance, dated June 10th. Lydia began to gather her purse, a dismissive gesture. Well, I suppose that's everything. A sad business, but we must move on. Not quite, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice suddenly infused with a steel I hadn't heard before. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue-bound document. My heart gave a single, powerful thud. It was my father's will. I now have the duty to read a superseding document, he announced to the stunned room. A final codicil and reaffirmation of testamentary intent, executed by Arthur Vance on October 17th of last year. This document was delivered to my office by a bonded courier the following day, and per Mr. Vance's written instructions, was to be held and read only after the presentation of any subsequent fraudulent documents. Lydia froze, her hand hovering over her purse. Her smile faltered. What are you talking about? That's not possible. He was not well. On the contrary, Mr. Abernathy said, putting on a different pair of glasses. This document is accompanied by a notarized affidavit from Dr. Lawrence Matthews, attesting to Mr. Vance's full and complete testamentary capacity on the date of signing. It was witnessed by Dr. Matthews and by his attending nurse, Miss Gabriela Rosales. Charlotte's face was a mask of confusion, but Lydia's went pale. The performance was over. The real world had just crashed her stage. Mr. Abernathy began to read. The new will was my father's true voice. It spoke of his love for history, for truth, and for me. It began by revoking all previous wills and testaments. Then it addressed Lydia directly. To my wife, Lydia Vance, Abernathy read, his voice resonating with my father's cold fury, who saw my loneliness not as a vulnerability to be healed, but as an opportunity to be exploited. I leave the following: the legal minimum required by this state for a spouse, and nothing more. This sum is to be paid only after a full and complete forensic audit of my finances from the date of our marriage, an audit to be overseen by my executor. Lydia made a strangled sound. Executor? I'm the executor. Not according to this document, Abernathy said calmly. He continued reading. I name as my sole executor my beloved daughter, Eleanor Vance, in whose integrity, intelligence, and respect for the truth I have complete and unwavering faith. I looked at Lydia. All the color had drained from her face. She was looking at me, her eyes wide with dawning horror. She was no longer looking at the quiet, difficult daughter. She was looking at the woman who now controlled every penny, every document, every secret she had tried to bury. It got worse for her. The will went on. The house, which my daughter Eleanor grew up in, shall be placed in a trust for her benefit, to do with as she sees fit, Abernathy read. Lydia Vance and her daughter Charlotte are to vacate the premises within 30 days. Charlotte let out a genuine sob this time. My investment portfolio, my savings, and my collection of art and historical artifacts are to be left entirely to my daughter, Eleanor, to manage as part of the Vance Historical Foundation, a charitable entity she is to establish in my name, dedicated to the preservation of historical documents and the pursuit of truth. It was a masterstroke. He wasn't just giving me his wealth, he was giving me a mission that was the culmination of our shared life, a purpose built from the skills he had taught me. The final paragraph was the kill shot. Furthermore, Abernathy read, his voice grave, I have compiled and provided to my executor, Eleanor Vance, a complete dossier documenting years of financial malfeasance, fraud, and theft perpetrated by Lydia Vance. This dossier, including bank statements, recorded conversations, and a log of her efforts to isolate me from my family, is to be turned over to the district attorney's office, should any part of this, my true and final will, be contested. He looked up. The dossier is currently in my firm's vault, with a copy already delivered to a second secure location. Silence. The room was utterly, profoundly silent, save for Charlotte's quiet weeping. Lydia stared at me, her face a grotesque collage of shock, rage, and disbelief. The mask was gone. Underneath was just a common thief caught in the act. You, she whispered, the word dripping with venom. You did this. No, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. I didn't do anything. I just read the history. My father wrote it. Lydia stood up so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. This is a joke, a fabrication. My lawyers will tear this apart. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Abernathy said mildly. As I stated, contesting the will automatically triggers the release of the dossier to the authorities. Given the evidence of offshore accounts and systematic embezzlement, I imagine the penalties would be significant. He paused. Federal, even. The word federal hung in the air. Lydia flinched as if struck. She knew what my father had found. She knew it was all true. Her power, built on a foundation of lies, had just crumbled to dust. She grabbed Charlotte's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her daughter's skin, and practically dragged her from the room without another word. As the door slammed shut, a long, shuddering breath escaped me. It wasn't a breath of triumph. It was a breath of grief, of relief, of a long and heavy weight finally being set down. Mr. Abernathy looked at me, his eyes kind. Your father would be very proud, Eleanor. I looked at the blue-bound will on his desk. He always said history's justice is slow, I murmured. Yes, the old lawyer agreed, but it is meticulous. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Lydia. The forensic audit I commissioned as executor was a bloodbath. It uncovered a web of deceit so extensive it shocked even Mr. Abernathy. She had siphoned millions, not just into offshore accounts, but into failed business ventures for her layabout brother, luxury assets for Charlotte, and a secret condominium in Miami. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the threat of a federal investigation, Lydia collapsed. She didn't contest the will. She couldn't. She took the paltry legal minimum the audit left her with and disappeared. The last I heard, she and Charlotte were living in a small rental apartment in a different state, her glittering social circle having abandoned her the moment the scandal broke. The image she had prized above all else was shattered beyond repair. As for me, I followed my father's instructions to the letter. Within 30 days, the house was empty of Lydia's garish, modern furniture. Walking through the rooms, I felt the ghosts of the past 15 years recede, replaced by the older, happier memories of a time before her. I didn't move back in. The house was no longer a home. It was a legacy. Thank you for watching this story about a daughter's fight for her father's truth and the quiet strength found in knowing who you are. Family betrayal cuts deep, but you don't have to face it alone. Support exists, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is document the truth and wait for the right moment. Subscribe to Sweet Retribution, hit that hype button to boost this video, and if you want to support what we do, the membership link is below. Share this with everyone who needs to remember that the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be preserved. 1 year later, the Vance Historical Foundation opened its doors. The headquarters is my father's old house, its rooms now carefully restored and filled not with expensive, soulless art, but with climate-controlled archives and research stations for visiting scholars. My office is my father's old study. The desk is the same one where he wrote his last true words to me. The photo of him and me at the archives sits in the center, right where it belongs. My life is quiet, but it is full. It is filled with the work I love, preserving the stories that others might try to erase. It is filled with the respect of my colleagues and the gratitude of the researchers we fund. The foundation is thriving, a testament not to my father's wealth, but to his character. I don't think about Lydia often. When I do, I feel a strange, distant pity. She spent so much energy building a life that was a beautiful, hollow lie. She tried to steal my father, to steal my history, to write me out of the story completely. She thought power was in what you could take and control. My father taught me that true power is in what you preserve and what you know. Her parting shot, the one she delivered with such smug cruelty in the lawyer's office, sometimes echoes in my mind. You were never really part of this family. She was right in a way. I was never part of the fragile, fraudulent family she built on a foundation of greed. I was and am part of something much stronger. I am the guardian of my father's legacy. I am the keeper of his truth. And that is a family she could never touch.